Hello everybody and welcome to week 3. As you can probably hear, I have a cold, so this week's video is not going to be overly lengthy. My kids went back to school and oh so lovingly shared their school germs with me. So that is why I sound like this. So this week we are taking what we've learned for the first 2 weeks, so our discussions about justice and our discussions about identity and communities, and thinking about them in context in terms of media and technology, right? So we live in a world where technology advances rapidly, where we use technology for almost everything on a daily basis. It's hard to imagine our lives currently without technology. And obviously technology ranges from a variety of things. So things like our toaster ovens are technology, our TVs, our microwaves, our iPhones, our laptops, our Androids, all these things are technology, but in different forms. And so technology has to do with justice in a variety of ways. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about this week is the role of the media. So what role does the media actually play in terms of securing justice, or as can be the case, perpetuating injustice, right? So one activity that I want you to do is to look at the NPR story that's talking about fake news, and then click within that and look at factitious and look at this idea of how do we spot this thing we call fake news. And so fake news seems to be something that's thrown around a lot, so we hear this term a lot, which we hear a lot more than we have in years past. It's always been around. It's not like fake news is new, but we seem to be much more obsessed with it and we're thinking about it a lot more. And so what is fake news? You know, how do we find it? How do we spot it? What's its purpose? Why is it there? So look into it. See how savvy you are in terms of spotting fake news. Can you recognize when something is fake, when something is not meant to be real? Either it's meant to be satire, so like The Onion. A lot of people read the headlines from The Onion and think that they're real, but The Onion is meant to be satire. Or is this actually a website or news source that is actually fictitious? So it's something that has been made up, which those seem to be far more readily present now than they have in years past. You're also going to read James Lull's discussion about hegemony. So this is a really brief piece. He's essentially taking Antonio Gramsci's notion of hegemony, which is this idea that it's the ways in which elite ruling classes perpetuate their status and their wealth. And so it takes acquiescence by the subordinate classes in order to perpetuate the dominance of the ruling classes. And so you want to think about the role that the media has to play in terms of how do we perpetuate the status of the dominant class, which then in turn perpetuates the status of the subordinate class. And an important thing to remember is that it's not always the way that it is. So the ruling class is not always the ruling class. And so there can be instances wherein the subordinate classes are able to counter this hegemony and are able to change the status quo. So we want to think about the role that the media has to play in those instances. Okay, you're also going to read Bullock et al.'s, so several authors on this piece, their discussion about media representations of the poor. And you'll notice in this piece that it is dated, right? So it's several years old. But what I want you to think about when you're looking at this piece is how much has actually changed. And so in this piece, they are calling for the media to be more accountable in terms of focusing media images on the poor that do not either render them invisible because they never talk about them, or perpetuate this idea that the poor are poor because of individual failings, because it is their fault, not that there are structural or institutional mechanisms at play that make people poor or perpetuate people's poverty. So I want you to think about that. Think about it in today's context. Are we seeing the same kinds of thing? What kinds of images do we see when we see poor people or when we talk about poverty in the media? You're also going to look at Chomsky's very brief chapter that talks about media control and the spectacle of propaganda. And so, again, we've heard a lot about propaganda in recent years. And so think about it. What is propaganda? How is it used? And how are the media used as a tool to perpetuate propaganda and as a way in which people are led to believe certain things through propaganda. Okay, so you want to think about those. And that is very similar to Herman's propaganda model. So read those in tandem together. And so when you're thinking about them, what is this propaganda model? And you want to know about the 5 filters that he talks about. So when we're thinking about those 5 filters, what are they? What do they do? What are their purpose? And so when you're thinking about them, remember that those 5 filters are the size, which is the concentrated ownership of the media. Advertising plays a role, the reliance that we as society have on the media to relate government information, so experts and things like that. Flack, which is the means by which we discipline the media. And then anti-communism as a national religion or as a control mechanism. And so think about those 5 filters and think about how stories are then relayed using those 5 filters. Your PowerPoint is going to have several additional items for you to think about and additional information just about, for example, the concentration of the media, how the vast majority of the media that we consume is owned by very few people. And so there are essentially 6 corporations that own the vast majority of what we see. And so what does that mean? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that something that we need to be cautious of or think about? So think about those things. And then the last thing that you're going to read is Lewis's Dear Internet, This Is Why We Can't Have Anything Nice. And so this is a very brief piece about what happens when the internet goes awry. And so essentially, it's looking at the ways in which institutionalized sexism and institutionalized racism come to play in seemingly innocuous things, right? So we have this blogger, she's trying to raise money for a campaign in order to raise awareness about the tropes in which women are presented in video games. So a fairly innocuous thing to do. And she received hate mail, death threats, rape threats, all from trolls on the internet trying to control the ways in which she was able to be on the internet. And we've seen this a lot. We saw this in Gamergate. We saw this, we see it a number of times, right? So the media can be used as a tool and as a force in which to control other individuals. And often when we see it, it is being used as a tool to control those who are already occupying oppressed categories. So racial minorities, ethnic minorities, women, sexual minorities. And so how has this anonymousness of the internet made it a forum that people can use in order to perpetuate hate and use hate speech and use death threats and things like that. So all really important things to think about, but a variety of different things. Again, so like our last 2 weeks, none of this is meant to be all-encompassing about this topic. It's instead meant to provide you with a variety of different ideas about media and technology. It's also important that we think about how much we use social media as a tool in our daily lives, and the ways in which social media can be used as a positive force as well as a negative force. Think about the ways in which technology is used and the internet is used to, say, buy and sell people. So it's not just Amazon where you can buy pretty much anything. There are dark corners of the internet that are also used to buy and sell humans. And so we have to recognize that with technology comes a lot of power. And so how do we or do we rein in that power, and how do we legislate it, and how do we create policies around it? And then also think about the ways in which you as a consumer, what are your media practices? How often are you on social media? How often do you look at the news? What kind of news do you look at? Do you pick up a paper, or do you look to your news feed in Facebook, or do you go to, say, the bbc.com? What are you doing? Where are you getting your information from? You will be watching 3 videos this week. They are all fun to watch, I think at least. And they are meant to display another part of the media, which is the ways in which certain kinds of stereotypes, certain kind of images are perpetuated and portrayed. For example, you'll watch misrepresentation, so the ways in which women have been displayed in the media. Tough guys, the ways in which masculinity is portrayed in the media. And then you'll watch The Illusionists, which is how advertising is used in the media in order to get people to buy things, particularly the effects that it has on young consumers, on women and on men who are buying certain products and trying to make themselves look a certain way. So that is pretty much it. You have your regular quiz that will open on the 4th, and you have your discussion board, original posting, and your response posting. And be sure to look at my comments that I posted previously on your discussion board so that you know how to improve. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to talk about these things in more detail or answer any questions that you have. All right, stay healthy, unlike me, and good luck this week.